Hello, coasters, and happy December. As we make our merry way through the last month of the year, we're here to talk to you about Sonic. I mean, that's why you follow the podcast.
Yeah. Ho,
Isn't it
ho,
right, Radrey?
ho. Who
Oh,
would know? That's all I'm going to say.
Robotnik clause.
Yeah. And no, I'm not calling you a ho. Just for the record.
You wouldn't be wrong if you did.
Oh, all right. Already, what is it? Already like a minute in, we're calling our audience hoes? Forgive us. Forgive me.
I was calling myself a hoe, but,
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. Our great listeners out there, none of you are hoes. We it's just a song. Just remember. It was a thing that Santa says. I don't know what part of the world you may be listening to this in. I know they, what is it? Different parts of the world have different iterations of who Santa Claus is. So,
Pierre Noel, Papa Christmas.
not sure why they
Saint
say
Nicholas.
ho, but I'm not
It's a
sure.
laugh.
It's a laugh. Do people laugh that way? They go, oh, I don't know. Okay.
Eggman does.
He says ho ho ho.
When he laughs, he goes, kind of more
Okay.
menacing.
I guess maybe that's like an onomatopoeia or something. Okay.
Yeah, pretty much.
Anyway, I digress. Malzilla, why are we here today?
We're 2 minutes in. We're already digressing. That's a new record.
Well, it's our Christmas theme episode, and you know what that means. Well, Christmas 2024. That is.
Yeah. Awkward Christmas gifts and family conversations.
No, we're getting the gift of Sonic 3 for Christmas this year.
That's right.
Well,
And
a bit early too.
Yeah, I mean, less than 2 weeks. Yeah, we are in the home stretch. There are, they actually, we're recording this on Saturday night, Sunday morning, and today down in Brazil is their, movie Comic Con, and Ben, Jeff, Tika, and old James Marsden's were down there, and they had a big presentation.
That's a long way to go from Hollywood.
Yeah, Paramount's paying for their trip, so probably get a private jet, maybe.
They must have quite the audience there if they're going all the way down there.
Well, while not as popular, Sonic is not as popular in South America as it is in North America from the, our data finding from the Sega Sammy reports, but there's still a big presence, and they showed a lot of clips of the audience, and they were all very excited.
So. Right. Well, Malzilla, tell us, why are we here today? Why are we in this recording booth?
We are in this recording booth, this podcast center, our pod egg, if you will, our death pod. We're here to talk about the first Sonic film, Sonic 2020, Sonic the Hedgehog, and its effect. Is it a good movie? Is its effect on the franchise? We're here to talk about it. It's been a few years. We both recently rewatched it, and we have thoughts. We want to talk about them and maybe spur some discussion. So leave some comments. Join our Discord. Follow us on Blue Sky and Twitter. Follow us on Tumblr. How's that for a plug?
Be sure to follow our sponsor, Raid Shadow Legends. By the way, that's a joke. We don't have any sponsors yet.
Yeah, we have no sponsors. We're probably never gonna spend. We're not that important. But we hope you enjoy this as we talk about Sonic 2020. So I guess normally if you've listened to our Sat AM reviews, we've kind of summed up the episodes. We're doing this one a little differently because we're pretty much going out on the assumption that you've all seen Sonic 2020, Sonic the Hedgehog the movie, probably once, twice, 3 times, or 4 in the last few years. But if you haven't, we'll throw a spoiler warning here.
We're gonna talk about the entire movie, the plot, like how it got started, how it ended, and just a little pre-production, behind the scenes notes as well.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this, Radrey, because I have a little bit of a spiel to get that ready and kind of in the zone. So let me ask you this: upon your rewatching this, what do you think? Has it held up to you?
My opinion, has it changed in the second viewing? Is that the question?
Or or second or third or fourth? I mean, how many times have you seen this movie? You think?
This would be my second viewing. It's
Okay, you've only
interesting. Yeah, I've only seen it once. It's funny because I went into my Letterbox account because this is the only way I keep track of the actual movies I've seen. So, and sometimes I write like a 1 sentence review of every movie because I got a busy life. And the review I wrote was in all caps, massively average. That's all I wrote. And I guess upon watching it a second time, I thought it was kind of cool. I liked it. I mean, there are I have a few what's the word, quibbles with this movie.
Right.
Yeah, a few gripes, a couple of points that stuck out to me that are like, did the people who make this movie know what they are making? I guess I could kind of start off a little bit with the history about what led up to the Sonic movie.
It is actually a fascinating story because they've been trying to do a Sonic movie since the 90s.
Has it gone all the way back to the 90s?
Well, I know, Ben Hurst wanted to do a Sad AM movie.
Oh, that's what you're talking about. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Penders had his Sonic Armageddon. I have no idea. All I can say about that is Sonic meets Titan AE for all intents and purposes. It looks like, at least from his promo sketches.
Well, yeah, that was the thing back then. Like that, and was it Treasure Planet? That was definitely the whole steampunk look. But yes, but that's beside the point.
Steampunk, yeah.
Yeah, because my research kind of starts more from when Sony purchased it. It was or they got the license because they wanted to get at a bunch of these video game licenses because they already had a fan base that was already installed to the IP, right? Because they had a very successful run with Resident Evil. I think that was Sony.
There was 8 of those movies. They made them on cheap. They were able to just put those out a bunch.
I've never seen a single one of them. So I don't know how awful or good they are. I mean, I don't know. When I look at these movies, all I think about is one person, Uwe Boll, and I don't think he was even involved with any of these. But
he wasn't with a few of them.
He was.
I think most video game fans know Uwe Boll. I mean, I could be wrong. I'm not in the mood to fact check, but
for our listeners out there, Uwe Boll is a famous movie producer, director. And
famous is pushing it, but yeah.
Well, he was best known for being kind of what's the word to describe him? A little belligerent in terms of his status in Hollywood and making movies for a while. Maybe not belligerent, maybe arrogant. I don't know. How would you describe him, Melzilla?
Kind of cocky.
Okay, all right, so I'm right. Yeah, I mean the early 2010s and then the later 2010s. This is when we saw Sony purchase the rights to I think a lot of video game movies. I think Uncharted and a couple of others. I mean, a lot that came to fruition. I think also what's that one? The Last of Us as well, which later became an HBO show. But yeah, I believe that when Sony bought it, I mean, the one thing that really kind of cracks me up about when Sony bought this movie was, I don't know if you remember that North Korea hacked Sony, and they had a bunch of...
Oh, yeah, that big Sony leaks, yeah. I do remember that.
And it was, I forgot who it was, but it was one of the producers talking back and forth about, they kept calling it Sonic the Hedgehog. Just to show you how much they cared about this property, right? So, with that in mind, I think it got stuck in limbo, or there's some sort of creative differences. I'm not sure what the
creative hell.
I think that was it, if I remember correctly. One of our listeners actually, Asul's a big person in terms of being interested in the production of the Sonic movie. He was there since the very beginning and he knows all these minute details. But I don't want to get into all that. Yeah, pretty much what happened after this was after 2017, Sony dropped the license or something, and that's when
I think they just flat out sold it to Paramount. They sold the whole thing, the script, the idea, like the staff, just lock, stock, and barrel.
Yeah, so yeah, it switched hands with Paramount pretty much, and yeah, and you know the most infamous part of the Sonic movie after this point was like the. Do you okay? Let me ask you this: do you remember the reveal when they revealed the Sonic, the look of him, or like just the
The OG
poster?
look. Oh God.
Like, remember,
Was
like
that?
when he was like in a silhouette and he had like those giant like yam hands and those
Yeah,
yam
like in
feet.
those weird like legs, like overly, and atomically correct legs. That's just like, and I think we got like the trailer like the next day, and then just it was, it's one thing for Sonic fans to laugh at you, but for Sonic fans and non-Sonic fans to laugh at you in unison is it's pretty damning. It's pretty damning, and to their credit, they decided to, bite the bullet. And, it's one of those things where here we are 4 years later, we're on the cusp of a third movie. They got a spin-off TV show. We know there's going to be a Sonic 4, and, depending on how much this movie makes, there may be a lot more Sonic coming out of Paramount. They might have found their new cash cow.
Oh right, well it's just revealed today, or at least at the time of this recording, that some source revealed that there's going to be multiple post-credit sequences,
Yeah,
or
a lighter,
yeah, what do they
the
call those?
movie
After the denouement, they have like a little teaser for the next possible movie, and
singer.
then a lot of that a lot of that stuff. But yes, yeah, it did produce a lot of new. It was pretty lucrative, I guess you could say, in terms of like being a product for Paramount.
I mean,
But
it's lucrative enough that they're going with a fourth one. And, if you've listened to any of the whisperers on the internet, Paramount is interested in a shadow project, whether it be a TV show or a movie. I think a lot of voices in the street have said that's going to depend on how well the movie does. And I hope they go with the movie because
we need
I'm
more
I'm thinking
Kristen
these.
Ritter,
Oh,
I don't
we
know.
have all have our theories about her, and they actually just released a clip with her in it, and she's kind of mean to Sonic and company. She just calls them aliens.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
very
Um,
dismissive of them as well.
yes. But to backtrack a bit here, yes, obviously, the original design for Sonic, prompted this huge backlash from not just, fans, but like journalists. And I
Oh,
remember at this
everyone,
time. Yeah, I remember at this
everyone.
time. This is sort of my relationship with this series is that like I've famously said, or maybe if we have a new listener on here, my jumping off point of Sonic was Sonic 3D Blast. That for some reason that game just didn't do it for me.
Terrible
And
game.
I kept hearing all these little things about Sonic here and there. When trying to think here. I remember a friend of mine, like he would ask me things like, "You should." At this time, was it 2010? I was really into like doing YouTube videos. I was really doing lots of YouTube videos on Japan content because that was the thing. This is before Abroad in Japan. It was such a novel thing, and people would just click on you just because you were in Japan and you do the most mundane things, and they just found this fascinating. I mean, now it's incredibly oversaturated, and there's tons of like, check out this restaurant I went to in Japan, where it's like one of these things where people click on the content. They don't click on it for you. They're not really interested in you, but that's beside the point. I remember a friend of mine, for my listeners who've been sticking around since, my Japan days, thank you for sticking around. I know maybe you feel like you're being bombarded with all the Sonic content that you didn't ask for. I mean, this is the thing I'm interested in now, but one of the creators I used to, collaborate with a lot, a man named Tikyo Sam, a very controversial figure. He used to say, "Why don't you do like a Sonic series or a review of the Sonic stuff? Or like, why is Sonic turning into a werewolf? why is Sonic doing this? And I remember it was just such a laughing stock at, like, I think around this time, like the 2010s, because
Well, we were right in the middle of the dark ages. You're coming off of Sonic '06,
yes,
and
there was
again,
Sonic
that was,
'06, yes.
that was that, for a lot of people, that was the, output was the nail in the coffin to the franchise. Shadow 5 was met with mixed to low fanfare. Sonic '06, which again, we could do a whole pod on that, and almost kind of Sonic fans' revisionist history of it. But yeah, they were in the dark ages. Um, Unleashed is really popular. I know a lot of people like that, but um, it was really a transition phase for the franchise as they kind of transitioned from these big bombastic shonen-esque, stories to kind of more mundane. Ha ha ha! We're gonna go to this intergalactic, you know, theme park that Eggman's built and see what's going on.
Oh, with
And
colors, yeah.
yeah, like colors. Things, the stakes got lower, the stories got smaller, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. As kind of, I'll relate that to the movie, but it was a dark time, and then Boom kind of blew up in their faces. So, and then they got some cred back with Mania, though that was not really them. But then Forces came out, and that was about as mediocre. I mean, it's not a terrible game. It's just not a good game. It's just kind of is
It
the
had mixed
definition.
reviews. It was very
Yeah,
mixed.
to me, it is like the definition of middle of the road. Just kind of, it's some neat ideas, but it's also just kind of meh.
Yeah, that was 2017, and that's right around the time when Sony dropped the project for Sonic, and that's when it switched hands. So I guess this makes me kind of beg the question here, Malzilla. What's your relationship with this movie?
Well, it's actually interesting because this got me back into Sonic, and
Same
I
here as
kind
well.
of,
I could talk about this.
yeah, I lasted longer with Sonic. Again, I had a Dreamcast. I played, and I still play Adventure and Adventure 2 religiously. Probably play Adventure 2 next week now that I think about it. But I had Heroes. It was fine. I had Shadow. It was okay. I didn't have any of the next gen systems, so I kind of jumped off with '06. Plus, I was doing, I was in high school and I was doing sports, so there really wasn't much time for Sonic and Company. Though I kind of would occasionally, if I was in a bookstore, and check the comic rack and see what was going on in the Archie world. But I was kind of really kind of looking at from the outside looking in, just kind of saying like, huh, things have changed. I heard some good things here and there, and ultimately when they're like, oh yeah, they're making a Sonic movie, and then the trailer comes out, I'm like, oh god, this is terrible. And then I hear like, oh, they're gonna redo it. I'm like, okay, well that's interesting. And then they put out the new trailer, and I'm like, okay, this is kind of interesting. I want to see how this goes. And so I kind of dived back in. By that time, where they were in the middle of the metal virus for IDW, so I kind of was able to catch up in the early 2000, early 2020. Well, then COVID happened and everything shut down. So, but yeah, this is I think I can safely say this got me back into Sonic as a franchise, and I think when we look at the history, if we take some steps back, this movie is gonna, it is the response, its success has led to where Sonic is as a franchise right now. And the quality of Sonic that we're getting right now is because of the movie. So, this is going to be, you know, what Sat AM was for us, what Sonic X is for the generations after us. This is what the movie is for a new generation of Sonic fans.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, I remember when I heard the announcement that, or I think I saw online, probably most likely, that they're releasing a Sonic movie. My reaction to this was kind of very. I wasn't really well, maybe a little bit leaning more underwhelmed than I am whelmed. Definitely wasn't overwhelmed. Because at this time, I think it was like around like the Michael Bay Transformers and the Michael
Yeah.
Bay and Ninja Turtles. And so it's like we've kind of been conditioned to understand that the vision that a lot of people have for these like video game to movie adaptations, they're relatively bad They're relatively like, I guess I shouldn't say bad. I should say the vision is very different, because when you're adapting, a video game or a book or one of these things, from um, one medium to the other, of course, something is lost. It's impossible to faithfully, 100% adapt something. So you're going to use the tools that are at your disposal to like make a movie, or what you're familiar with and how to make a movie or how to produce a movie. So, and I remember there was like an interview. I think it went viral. I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong, people. But Michael Bay was on record of saying like, well, I don't really care what people think of my movies. You'll watch it anyway. So there's kind of this real arrogance, this like huge hubris, with people, or I should say producers, to where, they didn't really care about the fans. Like we were kind of used to this, like, Hollywood, they're out of touch, or they're not out of touch. They think like they're our parents, right? And they know what's good for us and what's appropriate. So it was quite the shocker to admit, that the change in the design actually meant something to people. Because I was kind of the opinion at that time, like, even if they change the design, it's still going to be a bad movie, because because
the bar was super low.
It was super low, yeah.
It was almost subterranean. And I think that's also kind of when people saw it, they're like, oh, this is, like, I think everyone thought this would be terrible. And, it's a very charming film.
Right. I mean, this was also off the heels of, like, what was the other movie that came out? Like, Ghost in the Shell, right? The whole controversy about the whitewashing thing. And, of course, you never really expect Hollywood to bend the knee to, like, the people who watch it, right? The people who are leaving the theater, to like, you kind of I get this impression that their attitude is kind of like, fuck them. They don't know what they're listening to. They don't know, they don't understand. We understand, right? So just actually seeing that, I can't think, maybe there's probably other examples, but this is like the strongest example of like the fan input actually, contributing to something. So, I mean,
oh yeah,
you never really saw this, or this is pretty rare. I mean, maybe there's some examples.
Extremely rare.
Yeah,
like, it was extremely rare. Like, that's why it got a lot of buzz from non-Sonic fans, was that, oh wait, they decided to say, hey, we're going to push it back a few months and we're going to redo stuff. And that, you didn't see that. You never see that because, it's, what is a mob to a king?
Right.
You have these powerful studios who ultimately they know how to make movies and the average Joe doesn't. Likewise, a lot of the fans, they know Sonic, or at least we think we know Sonic, and kind of balancing, how to please this rabid mob, but also please the general audience who might not be rabid, but, are kind of intrigued.
Right. Well, I also remember like watching the H3 podcast where they were clowning on the Sonic movie, and I was actually enjoying some of their clowning, like the way they were putting it down. And then also, I could tell you like the biggest pivotal moment was like watching like Phil DeFranco, because he usually talks about the news all the time, and him mentioning the Sonic movie as like a news segment and just saying, "Wow, that just really changes the entire film." And it's just sort of like, it was one of those moments where I kind of had this, aha moment where I said, maybe this does really make a big change, because, it's like if you, race swapped Scarlett Johansson to like an Asian lady to play the Ghost in the Shell character, right? It's like, it's still not a good movie, right? You'd think that, right? You'd think that this wouldn't make a difference. But I guess it's one of those things where it's like if you're looking at something so grotesque, it does take you out of it. It does kind of like take you out of like the story and how you're looking, or how you're watching and how you perceive it. So yeah, it was a very pivotal moment for the world, I guess you could say.
Oh yeah, it certainly set a new precedent.
So I guess I have to ask you the same question you asked me, Melzillo. Has your opinion changed at all since the second viewing of this movie?
Well, I think I said I've probably seen this movie about 3 or 4 times. It's been a
Wow.
few years since I've watched it.
How many times you see in the
Um,
theater?
Probably well once
Yeah,
really.
once for
Maybe I
me
saw
too.
it twice.
Actually, no.
Maybe.
I take this back. This is around the time when Corona was a thing. Or
Yeah, it
Corona
was
was
like
just starting.
yeah, it was literally just starting. I have a funny work story about that, but I'll save that for another day. But yeah, I think I might have saw it like the next week, but then again, a couple weeks later, everything shut down. So, I mean, really, if you go to Box Office Mojo, which is kind of a fun website, you know, the first movie, domestically made $148 million and was only in theaters from February 14th to March 19th.
Mm-hmm.
So it was barely in theaters for a month. It made about $150 million domestically, and at that time, that was a pretty good haul.
Right. I also remember too. I didn't see it in the theaters because it did come to Japan, but it came out like around the summer. But my girlfriend was really worried about catching Corona because there was no vaccine or. I mean, of course, there was like a lot of procedures at the time, like wearing masks and social distancing. But like, I think it was like going to a movie theater or like a restaurant was like really dangerous because there's a higher chance of you catching it. And I kind of have a weak immune system. Or let me put it this way: I'm one of these type of people that like when I get sick, I really get sick. So, and like it like kicks my ass, and especially like a disease like Corona. She wasn't too keen on me like going to the theater, so of course we watched it at home, um, through the miracle of the internet. That's all I'm gonna say. So,
Miracle of the Internet.
because Japan. Here's another thing we could talk about. I'm not gonna talk too much about it, but Japan is notorious for always releasing like foreign films in Japan really late, like
Like months,
incredibly,
like
like
half a
years
year.
sometimes. Yeah, when all the hype is pretty much gone for the film of where it's like released, like in the U.S. or something, like months, sometimes 3 months, sometimes years, and yeah, so sometimes you really have to play the waiting game when having to watch it, but that was pretty much when I saw it was at home, and it was just one time. But you saw it in the theater. How was it with an audience?
Yeah, it was good. I saw it with a buddy of mine, coworker, and we both really enjoyed it. And you know, I rewatched it this week. I had to go down to Portland, Oregon for a work trip, and sitting in my hotel room, had my tablet out, pulled up Paramount Plus, and I forgot how much of a charming film it is. I really enjoyed it. It's a very tightly paced script, and I think that does wonders for it.
Uh, here's a question I have for you. Did the movie give you any of the feels, if you know what I mean?
There were some good little, heartfelt moments. There's about 3 or 4.
Tell us
Uh,
what those 3 or 4 moments are. Do you have them off the top of
I
your
think,
head?
yeah, I think the first one is kind of when he has his little tantrum on the baseball diamond. I mean, I don't want to call it a tantrum, but he kind of had his little
Well,
momentary
that's
speed
that's
freak
that's
out.
the inciting incident in terms of
Yeah,
screenplay writing. So
yeah,
yes,
the instigating incident. But
yes.
yeah, he kind of has this, because he's basically in isolation. He's living in the shadows, kind of, Quasimodo, no, you know, Hunchback of Notre Dame style, where he wants to engage with people, but he can't. He's an alien, and Longclaw told him not to, deal with people because he's got power and they'll exploit it. But kind of when he plays baseball and realizes that he's got, he's got no one. He is alone, and loneliness is something that I think a lot of the current generations are starting to look at and how terrifying and that can be, and you feel for the guy.
Yeah, no, it's very relatable, especially like during Corona, when everybody had to isolate themselves. So it's like the perfect
During COVID,
movie.
yeah,
The perfect COVID movie, right?
exactly.
Where it's
Another shot.
go
Oh,
on.
I was gonna say another scene that was pretty powerful is when JoJo gives him the shoes. And
Oh,
he's just like,
really?
I've
That
never
gave you the
been,
feels? Didn't for me, but all right.
it was kind of a case of like, he's like, no one's ever given me a gift before. And, she's like, here, so you don't hurt your feet. Because he's running in those really ratty, sneakers that were pretty much worn out.
Uh-huh.
So, Tom's speech at the end of, he was my friend. His name was Sonic, and he knew more about being human than you were. And Sonic uses a little friendship power boost. And, a few little heartfelt moments here and there.
Really? That didn't do it for me. I'll get into that in a minute,
Well,
but
your
okay.
your your heart is made of ice, Radrey. We've
Sometimes.
established.
Sometimes. Uh, okay. I will admit that the feels that you get at the beginning of the film are pretty universal. I'd say. In terms of like, was it loneliness is definitely a thing that a lot of people go through, especially nowadays. Especially like because with algorithms, we're all kind of up our own asses when it comes to the stuff we like. It's like this is how we show our age, Melzilla, but there was a time when like you could watch the same damn thing on TV and you could like talk about other people about that same damn thing that you watched. Like I'm sure a lot of people our age all remember watching Ernest Scared Stupid, back when they played that on television, God, I don't know how many times they played it, but a lot, right? You know what I'm talking about, right?
There's a lot of programs that they would play on repeat.
Yes. So everybody saw those. Everybody knew them, right? Especially like even with Saddam because people saw them. I'm not sure how many times they repeated it, but I do know I still meet people, a lot of people my age who remember watching the show like early in the morning. So, but yes, back to Sonic the Hedgehog is that the thing is that's the inciting incident about what gets Sonic to, um, throw a tantrum, as you said, and then that alerts, um, I want to say the government? It's the government.
Yep.
It's the Pentagon, right? That's the Situation Room, right? That we see?
The War Room, yes.
Oh, the War Room. Okay. I guess now we're really getting into the plot. But, yeah, they're in the War Room, and
I
then...
do have one other scene that was pretty, feelsy, was
Okay.
the when he goes up in the attic and they've moved all his stuff in the attic and he's got his own bed and he kind of, thanks them for taking him in. He'd been alone for 10 years and now he's got a family.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, I'll get into that in a minute. I want to go through the plot here a bit. So they're in the Situation Room, right? Or not the Situation. Would you say the War Room?
War Room.
And then like they say like, well, we need to call you know who, which kind of prompts me to ask this question, like, what is it? Why was Robotnik called on, and like, what role does he play in the U.S.?
Well, they talked about it. They talked about that his drone technology was through the roof. They said he's got 5 PhDs.
Right.
They asked him like, "Hey, do you remember that uprising in Turkmenistan?" They're like, "Where exactly?" So clearly, he had worked for the government before, and he would be called in federally to looks like clean up messes.
And it seems like they don't like him too.
Yeah, I mean, well, as we get to meet Robotnik, yeah, he's not exactly a personable guy. Kind of a dick, really.
Oh no! In the second viewing, I do not remember Jim Carrey being that much of a jerk. I'm like throwing people through windows and what else? Like, what else did he do? Like he did a lot of things that are like, man, this guy is a jerk, man. I mean, obviously he's the villain of this, the movie, so of course he can do this. If he was the main character, he would just like people would just hate this.
But yeah, he's beating up on people. He abuses Stone, demeans anyone.
That's right, beating up Stone. That's right, pulling him by the mouth and talking like over people, interrupting people. Yeah.
His opening scene, and he walks out of the trailer. He goes up to the major in charge and says, doesn't even say, "Hey, I'm a Robotnik. I'm taking over." It's just, "Are you in charge?" And then just kind of just berates the guy. Like that's his first interaction with him. It's like, tell him to stop looking, or I'll post his web browser history, and it's just like, damn, man.
I guess this is a good way to segue into my question here. Well, it's not really a question, more of a statement, but I want to talk a little bit about Jim Carrey. Um, now, when I remember watching this, like especially the trailer, because like that scene where he talks over the that actor. I mean, I've seen him in
The
several other
army guy.
things. Was he in like Starship Troopers or something? He has a very familiar face.
I'm sure he's probably
He's
in a
one of
bunch
those
of things.
character actors there where they always have him as like the military guy who's a dick, right? And he always plays that one role. Um, but anyway, I remember watching this in the trailer back when they had the whole Gangster's Paradise thing, right?
Yep.
And I remember thinking, like, the one thing that kind of takes me out of this movie, the one thing I kind of not makes me say this movie is massively average, was I remember watching this interview with Jim Carrey where he said something like, Sonic is the innocence that Robotnik could never have. I can't remember the exact wording, but do you remember this
Something to that
interview?
extent. It's basically he was talking about how Robotnik and Sonic are ideologically polar opposites, where Sonic has this naive, childlike wonder, and just he's got where Eggman's he's very cynical, he's very he's not a good person, and it was funny is that he talked about when he was trying to like come up with a backstory for the character. It's like he came and says this guy's got to be like an unwanted child orphan who just grew up alone with no one to like show him any compassion. And you get that crazy line where he's talking to Tom, where he's like, I was spitting out formulas while you were spitting up formula, and then Tom says I was breastfed, and then Robotnik says nice and pauses. And everyone's just like, whoa, did we make a lactation joke here? And he says, rub it in my orphan face. And that's like, well, I don't know how much of Eggman, Brotnik's backstory, you know, Jim knew at the time, but it's like, he's kind of right on the right track, because I think we're gonna get
Dare
a
I
lot.
say this is actually some good writing here or some good acting, because he makes you really
Oh yeah,
feel for the guy, despite like us not really ever getting a backstory on who, Robotnik was, right?
we get kind of like you can kind of see what were the events that made him him. Like he talked about how the one bully who punched him, he ended up getting some kind of revenge, and think the guy's got his jaw broken, and then
Mm-hmm.
Tom's like, whatever, man, I'm gonna punch you again.
Yeah, no, I
Because
mean, okay, I will say that the interaction between Tom and Eggman or Robotnik for a sec, he's not revealed as Eggman until Sonic nicknames him that later in the movie. But I love that interaction, that first interaction.
at the house,
The back and forth is just like, that writing is just
yeah,
so good. If it's not the writing,
yeah,
it's the acting, or
yeah.
the direction.
Jim and James Marsden, who plays Tom, they had a really good banter, like in the few scenes that they had, at the house, on the phone, on top of the Transamerica building, and then, on the Eggmobile. He's like, who do you think you are? I'm the Donut Lord, you son of a bitch. And he doesn't get to say bitch, but kind of, you know,
It's hinted at.
yeah.
Yeah.
Eggman's, Ivo's like, who the hell do you think you are? I'm the Donut Lord, you son of a bitch. And it kind of gets knocked away before he can say
If
it,
I was
which
ever, if they were to ask me to like write a Sonic movie, that's one line I would definitely put in there is I'd have Tom say something like, or no, Robotnik say something like, "What kind of man are you?" And then Tom goes, "This kind," and like hits him with like his fist or something.
yeah.
If anybody
Yeah,
knows what movie that's from, you good on you. I'll buy you lunch or I'll buy you coffee. Comment down
but
below
yeah,
if you know what movie that's from.
exactly. Um,
And
but yeah,
Toxic Avenger
it's
4 does not count, even though they do cite it in that movie.
it is kind of one of those things where, not to jump too far ahead of ourselves, but I was kind of disappointed that we didn't get a whole lot of Tom Robotnik scenes in Sonic 2, because Like, I understand they're trying to
Yeah,
set
that's
up
why I
Sonic.
completely forgot about it. I completely forgot that they had this interaction and how fun it was.
So, maybe the writers of the movie kind of knew what they were doing. Maybe.
In this scene in particular, this scene was like, in our Sad Am review, this was sort of like the moment that said, this is my Sonic and Sally moment, right? Because the Sonic and Sally moments in Sad Am are like some of the best, back and forth dialogue, the witty banter, the communication. This was a lot of fun. So I A+ for this moment in the film. But I want to pivot a little bit back to like talking about Jim Carrey for a minute, unless you had more to say about
Of
this.
course, there's a lot to
Um,
talk about, Jim.
yeah, well, I was slightly underwhelmed by his performance in this. I think if I didn't know who Jim Carrey was, I would have found this take on Robotnik to be interesting. Not like that I really enjoyed it, but interesting. But because I know who Jim Carrey is, I know his other movies that he's done, like The Grinch, Dumb and
Anyone who grew up
Dumber.
in the '90s,
Yeah,
yeah,
Bruce Almighty, and
The
it
Mask.
kind of takes me out of it a little bit knowing that this is Jim Carrey playing Robotnik playing Jim Carrey. And, it's one of these things where it's like, it makes me think, is this just a movie that's like a Jim Carrey vehicle that was just made primarily to like, you know, a showstopper to like say it, the new Jim Carrey movie where he plays Eggman or Robotnik, right? And it's not really
Yeah,
like, it's just sort of like dress up where it's not really much of a,
and I think a
it's
lot
not
that brought
Sonic.
in a
It's
lot
not
of
Sonic
people.
put front and center. Anyway, yes. What are you saying?
Um, I would say kind of agree. Jim has always been kind of an actor who goes to the beat of his own drum, and he's been in some weird movies in the 2000s and early 2010. He had some weird ideas and policies, and but again, he's been in so many iconic 90s comedies that he's a veteran character, even though if you could argue that he just plays Jim Carrey playing the Grinch or Jim Carrey playing the Mask. He's very manic in many ways, closest we have to Robin Williams, RIP, in my opinion. But
That's fair.
yeah, yeah, I would say um
Well, one.
Robotnik Eggman is an interesting role because in many ways, I see it kind of like the Joker from Batman,
Okay.
where you can kind of, it's a spectrum.
Well, he
Like,
did play the
well, like,
Riddler.
yeah. Well, kind of let me explain for a second. So,
Okay.
like,
Go on.
people who know Batman know there's been many people who've played the Joker, live action, cartoon, video games, etc., etc. So, and you kind of have a scale of, are we going to make him more funny? Are we going to make him more psychotic? We're going to kind of blend the two. Obviously, Heath Ledger and Joaquin Phoenix won Oscars for playing him, either as you know an anarchist terrorist or a man with psychological problems who've been abused by society, where you also have kind of the Cesar Romero, Batman 66, kind of more cartoony clown. Jack Nicholson was kind of in kind of that cartoony gangster. Obviously, Mark Hamill sits above them all with his decades of performing the Joker is kind of this perfect blend where he could be manic hilarious, but then he could also be completely psychotic. And Eggman, to me, Robotnik is similar because you do get kind of different portrayals. Like, um, Sad AM Robotnik is kind of a more, a dictator. Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog, Robotnik was kind of more slapsticky. Same for Boom Eggman. Archie Eggman was kind of more in the tyrannical. He could be goofy, but he's more tyrannical. So you can kind of there's a spectrum like, oh, are we going to play him as a legit threat, which kind of Jim did, but Jim was able to kind of weave in some of the goofiness of, game Eggman and, a lot of modern day Eggman where he's evil, but he's also pretty affable. He's kind of funny to watch, you know, stomp around and get in his little Eggmobile and cry out, I hate that hedgehog.
Right, right. I mean, I was gonna go a little bit back a little bit to talk a little bit about like Jim Carrey, like when he played the Grinch, in particular. Like his performance, it's like he kind of really done it disappears into the role, and he does a little bit with this Eggman one because it's his portrayal of it, or it's his take, but it's kind of like for me this is kind of like a hybrid. It's a little bit of a hybrid of his take of what Robotnik is, and it's Jim Carrey, right? I mean, like, like a lot of movies that we see nowadays, it's like if we watch a Tom Cruise movie, we don't really remember him as Ethan Hunt. We remember him as Tom Cruise, right?
You see that a lot with comedians like Will Ferrell. Will Ferrell plays one character, Will Ferrell, and you love the movies he's in, but he doesn't really have acting range. The Rock is the same way. The Rock plays The Rock in no matter what film he's in. That's
Yeah.
basically all he can play.
So I mean, I'm kind of on the fence of with this. What is it? This depiction is kind of like, is this awesome or is this like kind of hammy? So I mean, but this being said, it does work for me. I do enjoy it, but I think this is where it sort of like pushes the film into me saying this is massively average. But that being said, let's move on. Unless you have more to say about this.
Yeah, we can move on. Again, we look at what Jim, this, it's interesting because if we look at, and I'm sure we'll bring this up later, Jim is kind of a one and done actor. He's only done a couple of sequels. He did Ace Ventura 2. He did
That is
Dumb
very
and
true.
Dumber.
Yeah.
So yeah, he doesn't really come back because he kind of feels like he's done, but he's come back for a third. He's come back to play this role a third time, and he's doing double duty. He's playing Gerald too, but it seems like he's they did a little featurette release today. Him talking. They're all talking. Keanu's talking about how much of a genius he is, and it's actually kind of funny. Keanu seems to be really in on this too, and Jim sold. He had a comment that says, I was never done with Robotnik. I was just taking a little power nap. And it seems like he really enjoys playing this character. I'm sure, the fact that his kids love it, his grandkids love it. And it's been, from what I heard, a pretty easy, filming schedule for his life. Kind of a 9 to 5, he gets to go home at a nice time. But, yeah, it seems like he's in it for the long haul. And, it's kind of become his franchise, at least in the cinematic, his character.
I now that we're talking about this, I do remember when they first announced Jim Carrey as Robotnik. They even I remember all the memes that came out after that was announced. I remember a lot of people, their reaction was generally like, what? Why him? Like, why not Danny DeVito? I mean, he looks more like Eggman, or, he looks more like an egg, right? So I remember people being a little confused, and I remember it was one of those things where I feel like they did it as a viral moment, or it felt like a manufactured viral moment, because I remember, that Batman meme of Batman slapping Robin. You know what I'm talking about?
My parents are dead.
Right.
Yeah.
And then there's one with Robin where he said, "Did you know that Jim Carrey is playing?" And then Batman slaps him. Yes, Robotnik. We know. All right, you don't need to keep telling me. And I remember that when it was first announced. That was the initial impression. I felt that way too, because everyone I talked to was talking about this.
I think it also kind of it depends on who you talk to. Like at the time, I was watching a lot of movie, YouTube channels, and none of them were really Sonic fans, but they were all movie buffs who grew up in the '90s, and they were all Jim Carrey fans. They're like, hey, if this can be a throwback to '90s Jim Carrey, then this movie can be really fun, and it was.
All right. So yes, I guess Jim Carrey really has an audience for the throwback to him as in the '90s role. So I guess I'm not sure if he's trying to reach out to that audience. He probably is. He probably knows that people love him for that '90s Jim Carrey, opposed to maybe, I don't know.
I'm sure.
What would you say modern Jim Carrey is?
I would say modern pre-Robotnik Jim Carrey was probably movies like The Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless
Yeah, he did a
Mind,
lot
and
more serious roles, like Eternal
like
Sunshine. The one role that really kind of stuck out for me that was Jim Carrey, where I felt like he really disappeared into the role, which I kind of felt really underwhelmed by. Was Kick-Ass 2 when he played, was it
yeah, that
Stars and Stripes?
yeah, Colonel Stars and Stripes. That was an interesting one because, um, obviously he filmed it. He said he had a good time filming it, but it was kind of released right off one of those, shooting attacks, and he just could not, in good conscience, condone the violence in the movie because it's a super violent movie, and
Oh
especially
yeah.
with kids going in to see this. So it's like I get it, but yeah, he'd done a lot of those kind of dark, serious films. Did you ever see The Majestic?
Yeah, I saw that one. Bruce Campbell's in
Uh,
that.
yeah, that was kind of an interesting role. He kind of had some humor, but it was kind of a dark film because how they're dealing with all the Hollywood blacklisting of the time.
They also had, was it The Truman Show? That wasn't really funny per se, but it was more. I
It
would say
was
that's
dark
more
humor,
dark humor. But he was a bit
black humor.
more. Yeah, that was more like the. I was early '90s Jim Carrey, I'd say, when he was more of kind of the down on his luck sort of like role that he seemed to play over and over again. And then there was like a TV show that he was in. What was it called? I have to check IMDb. Like Happiness or
Oh, The
something.
Man in the Moon, like The
Oh,
Man in
Man
the
in the
Moon.
Moon. Yes.
Yeah, he was on something really he was in something relatively recently.
Right. Right. Yeah. So I don't know. I'm on the fence still about his portrayal. I do enjoy it. That being said, um, he has a really great way of like taking me out of it, but also bringing me into it. I don't know. It's pretty sublime. Uh, it's interesting. Uh, but I guess to move on here, um, one thing I wanted to talk about was, was it the Disaster Artist, the book, not the movie, by James Franco in it, but
Yeah,
the one about Tommy Wiseau and the making
yeah,
of The Room, one
The
of the
Room.
worst movies
Yeah.
ever made. If you ever read the book, there's a early chapter in it where he talks about working on a movie called Retro Puppet Master, where he plays, the name's escaping me now, but the guy who made all the puppets in the Puppet Master series, and it was like kind of a prequel where he was like he played this. He was a French person who had this like really cheesy French accent, and the way he describes the movie is the people working on the movie were making a hamburger movie. And this next scene where like Tom and was it Tika Sumter? What was her name?
Sumter. Tika Sumter. Maddie.
Tika Sumter, where they're having this like little back and forth where they get a letter from where he's getting
San
transferred.
Francisco has yeah. Well, yeah. So Tom's kind of going through his own little crisis. He's a small town sheriff who dreams of big city being trying to be someone who matters. So he puts in an application to transfer to the San Francisco SFSPD, San Francisco Police Department.
Yes.
And so Maddie, kind of to be kind of funny, she gets two cakes. One is congratulations, the other one is like screw San Francisco with the Golden Gate Bridge on fire. And so when he gets the acceptance letter, she grabs the wrong cake, and they're like, "It's like I was hedging my bets."
Oh, right. Oh, I mean, the reason why I bring up the whole conversation about, The Disaster Artist by Greg Sestero, is like, I was wondering if like the people who were making this movie had the impression they're making a kids movie. So they kind of like their creative prowess, I don't know how else the best to describe it, was kind of like, turned down a lot of notches. So, because particularly with this scene, because to me this is like such a Hollywood script scene where it's like a plot device where they say things like, I'm 5 weeks until retirement, I'm about to leave, where it's like one of these scenes where like they have to like deliver
Cliche.
all the exposition in this kind of really mundane way, almost to the point where it makes me feel like the people on the screen are just they're reading a script because they need to move the movie forward, and the actors are just showing up because number one they need to get paid, and two they need to make this movie because they signed on to it because reasons, right? uh because I don't know, this scene in particular made me think of like somebody in Starbucks, clicking on their laptop while writing this up. Actually, heck, not even that. It doesn't. I don't even. I get more of like it was fed to like an algorithm, it's like saying, "How do we do this exposition scene?" I mean, the cake thing was funny. I mean, of course, that's a good gag. That's a pretty stable gag you can always do. But the whole scene of like, well, I've been in retirement, like I'm thinking about switching. It almost to the point where it's like, if I showed this scene to you and I told you it was not Sonic the Hedgehog, and like let's say I took a time machine, and would you be able to put together that this was from a Sonic movie? Let me ask you this.
No.
So what's your impression on this scene? Do you agree with my analysis here, or do you think I'm out of my
Um,
head?
I see what you're getting at. It is very exposition-y because again, it's in the beginning of the beginning of the film. It's really there to set up Tom's kind of moral dilemma
Yes.
because again, this becomes a point of conflict between Sonic and Tom down the line. Is that Sonic idolizes Green Hills because he's kind of had to live in the shadows, whereas Tom has been the guy everyone depends on, and he kind of feels like he doesn't matter, like he's just there to carry groceries or babysit, where Sonic says, what's wrong with protecting the people you care about? So it kind of is the grass greener on the other side type story, and that would be some conflict between them down the line.
Right, right. And I mean, it totally makes sense for Sonic to feel this way, especially because he finally felt comfortable in a new home, opposed to, even though he kind of like, here's the joke I'm going to throw in here. The funny thing about the way Sonic lives on Earth, it's like kind of the same way of like when like you listen to a podcast, like not this one, but like you listen to another podcast and then they say a joke and you start laughing at it. And then like how awkward do you look when like you're laughing at a podcast in public, while you're like jogging or, on your daily commute that's not your car. It's sort of like I remember seeing this meme once of like this one kid laughing with a bunch of these other women laughing. It was like an advertisement of all these women laughing, eating ice cream. And then
Okay.
there's like a picture of like a real kid looking at these women laughing, this picture, and then he's laughing. And the caption says, "This is what it's like laughing to hearing a podcast." And that's sort of how, I mean, this is a very meta way to explain it, but that's sort of how Sonic is in this movie. Because, like, he's peeping into like Donut Lord's house and watching Keanu Reeves movies, funnily enough. Uh, and like kind of like, relating to all these people is like Crazy Carl, and he loves all these like little characters, right? It's like his like little soap opera in a way, and he's just really into it. So I think that, yeah, that was just definitely a very relatable thing. And so for Sonic to say that like him leaving uh, Green Hill was very appropriate here.
Oh yeah.
So I guess
Well,
to move on a bit here, I don't really have much more to say about the plot or the rest of the story. To me, it's
okay.
more about like behind the scenes stuff or the concept of what the Sonic movie is. Did you have more to say about the plot?
um you know I kind of mentioned when I was rewatching it, it felt it's no doubt we are going to talk about the second film regarding a certain scene in Hawaii. Um, this felt the flow was very good. The scenes flow. There was really no pause for 5 minutes to do something that no one really cares about, so everyone can go pee or grab some popcorn. again, the flow was very good. It really surprised me how good the pacing
Yeah,
was.
they didn't linger too much on the schmaltzy moments, which I appreciated because sometimes, come on, like he's just got chocolate for the first time. He just got his shoes. I didn't ever feel that way with the feels they presented me there. So, A+ for not making me feel that way. It didn't make me groan. I'll say that much.
Okay. All right.
Nothing else about the plot. You want to talk about was it JoJo or JoJo's
Um,
mom? What was her name?
Rachel.
Rachel. Okay.
She was pretty minor. I mean, I don't think she really took
She becomes a
things
bigger
out.
character in the second movie, but yeah.
Yeah, we'll see her. We'll see her again in two, and then we'll see her again in three. And to what degree, we'll find out. But as I was watching the movie, and I was thinking about it, and kind of thinking where Sonic was as a franchise before the film, and where it's been since the film, is that Kaiser Neko of Team Four Star, the YouTube channel, the parents of Dragon Ball Z Abridged, he did a review on their channel for the first Sonic film where he kind of said Sonic 2020 is a good film with Sonic in it, but not necessarily a good Sonic film because there's not a whole lot of Sonic stuff in it. And I feel that's very true. But I would also kind of throw, an amendment to that, or kind of a sidebar, is that Sonic 2020, the movie, is not the movie the fandom wanted, but it was the movie the fandom needed because it really was such a lightning in the bottle catalyst, match onto you know a powder keg that pushed the franchise. It put some credibility back on the franchise's name. It's like, okay, you have a really successful movie. Obviously we're still very skeptical of the games Sega has put out recently because
I haven't even
they're
touched the new ones. I'll tell you that much.
yeah. Oh, yeah. You don't like playing the new ones anyway, so you
Frontiers
can
was
play Ventura,
okay. It was okay.
but it could have been worse. And I
Yes,
feel like
yes, this is
they
true.
made it, you know, as good as we got it, and as great as Sonic X Shadow Generation was, especially in the Shadow content. I think we collectively owe a lot of that to the success of this movie. Again, I know fans would have loved an animated movie a la the Super Mario Brothers movie, where you got Mario, Luigi, Bowser, Princess Peach, Donkey Kong, Toad, etc. But I feel like this movie, by kind of stripping away a lot of the fluff, kind of going back to basics, back to basically Sonic, Robotnik, and Tom, they get a lot chance to develop the characters. We get time to really get to know these characters, as opposed to just like suddenly we're ignoring the plot, just trying to find Easter eggs in the background of like, oh look, they're in Green Hills Zone or Chemical Plant or Angel Island or you know Station Square. Your attention was very much on the growth of Sonic, his relationship with Tom, the developing animosity with Robotnik. I do think Tika Sumpter was underused in both the
Yeah,
first and second
yeah, I
film,
definitely agree
but
with
I
that.
understand why people will agree with it, but are also fine with it because they want more time with the Sonic characters.
I mean, they make a good couple, Tom and Maddie. I do like them as a couple.
They,
I do
they
wish
do
they
have a
had
good
more interactions. I mean, sure was it. Maddie has a great interaction with Knuckles, I think, in the series, even though it's very brief. I do agree she is kind of underused, and she could be like have more comedic moments with the characters. I mean, I never have a moment when I'm watching it where I'm thinking this is Alf shit. I mean, when I saw like the trailer for the Knuckles show, I was the first thing that came into my mind is this is like Alf. You're like, I don't like Alf, man. I don't like sitcoms. Like, do I have to watch this? So, but I didn't get that. So, A+ and what is it? The acting, the writing. Uh, Yeah, a lot. It didn't take me out of it. Let me put it that way. I guess for our listeners out there who are listening to this podcast, who may, if you're in this far, be surprised if you still haven't seen the Sonic movie. But I guess just to wrap up the plot a little bit for people who haven't seen it or don't want to see it, or they just want to listen to the show. Pretty much the plot is that Sonic has rings where he goes to different portals, and like when he uses the ring, he was planning on leaving the Earth because he got found out because he had one of those tantrums, and his how would you describe this? His lightning power, his sonic speed.
Yeah, his and again, kind of a Hollywood. This is something that the fans have been debating about recently. Is that lightning, electricity is a common among speedsters to visually show that how fast they're going. Where a lot of fans have been kind of like, "Oh, he's all about the wind, blah blah blah," and it's just like, honestly, it's fine. It makes him distinct, and we've seen it like in Frontiers when you max out your rings, you get this little supercharged mode, kind of inspired by the movie. So, it's starting to proliferate through the franchise.
Yeah. Yes, definitely so. I mean, was it Sonic Frontiers? You could obviously see that they were using the lightning speed techniques that they used in the film to add them into like the games and make it a bit more congruent. Is that the word?
Yeah.
Or they make the continuity more smoother continuity. No, I'm losing my words here. But yes, to end the plot here, basically, he loses this bag of rings in San Francisco on the top of some building. I mean, this is our MacGuffin in terms of a movie. And I will say, in terms of it being a pretty average and a movie, I'd say both these movies, both Sonic 1 and the next Sonic movie, they do a great job of not trying to be bigger than it really is and failing at it, and really kind of knowing what it is, to the point where it's not trying to impress you too much, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It does what it needs to do. It's not like I guess like the review that's coming to my mind is like Red Letter Media's review of episode 1, and how much episode 1 was so ambitious about making this this prequel. And I would say the Sonic movie doesn't do that. It does what I would say
very smaller story. It's a very
smaller story where it's like what Mike Solasta, I think that's his name, where he pretty much said the biggest problem with episode 1 is that it didn't follow this formula that really works, where the formula basically is you have a character who's sort of down in his luck and he's having trouble, and then there's some kind of like thing that he wants or needs, because usually the way like screenwriting works is that there's always a want and a need, and usually the want is something simple, like they want a glass of water, or in this case they want to be Tom's friend. But what Sonic needs is, in the story, is that he needs a place to stay. He needs a home, right? Usually the way, because this is probably a G-rated movie, it's a general audience, because, most of the time, or at least earlier movies, it used to be that there was like a love interest, and then at the end of the movie, the love interest would, he would win over the heart of the love interest, and he gets what he needs, generally. Or he doesn't get what he needs, and it's a tragedy. Or that's usually how these movies are kind of made. And it's pretty easy to do it this way. It's like a crowd pleaser, and you can always like work on this structure and build off of it very well. And I'd say this movie does a really great job of doing that. But yeah, instead of the love interest now for 2020, the thing now is, because most audiences, or at least millennials and Generation Alpha, they don't like sex scenes anymore. So now it's just about family. What?
I say that's a lie. Sex scenes are great.
Oh no, they're great. Yeah, I mean, I know probably some movies still do this, but I would argue that they're trying to switch more to just about family. Because like the meme of like Vin Diesel about how everything is about family. Because it's a bit more, I guess you could say, acceptable. Because let's say you don't like your. Well, no. I'm contradicting myself here. Let's say you're not interested in love, or you're not interested in these things, or love is unattainable for you, whereas like family is something that everybody can relate to. It's similar to like putting a cute cat in the movie, right? Nobody's going to complain about it because it's cute and everybody likes it, right? I mean, sure, this is a little bit of a criticism. I'm a little annoyed with how overused it is, but I guess you could probably say the same thing with this structure that I'm talking about, that I'm, championing so much. So, yeah. So basically, anyway, the rest of the plot is that they eventually get back to this area in San Francisco, and they do this kind of Deadpool thing of like the beginning of the movie where they show Robotnik shooting Sonic through the city.
They do a very like an in medias res of like, hey, nice to see you. Guess what's going on? Why is all this happening? Well, let me rewind things and tell you how we got here.
Right. And yeah, and that's how we get back to that moment. I mean, it's a very I want to say that's a very 90s trope thing. I don't know if they do that anymore. Maybe they still do.
They still
I'm
do.
not even They still do?
They
Okay.
still do.
It's
Yeah, I mean,
very
they did it with
tropey.
Deadpool.
But yes.
They did it with Thor Ragnarok.
Oh, did they? Okay, I
Yeah,
skipped
it's like,
that one.
oh, Thor Ragnarok's great.
Okay.
It starts off he's in, and it's like, oh, you're probably wondering how I got here. Oh, Thor's going to escape, blah blah blah, and has this great fight song with the immigrant song playing in the background, and it was awesome.
Because I've seen some people, what was it, like an episode of Rick and Morty, where like, yeah, for our audience out there, I only liked season 2 of season 1 and 2 of Rick and Morty. 3 is when it started going downhill for me, but that's besides the point. Again, there's like that one scene where he talks to the guy or some cat or something who's writing a tale or he's writing a story, and you have to listen to it. And then he said one of these things where like, well, 10 weeks later. I'm like, dude, just talk about now, man. Don't try to do this 10 weeks later shit. Right? So, I don't know. I totally understand if people are getting tired of this trope, but I understand it's like a cold open. It's like, well, what led us up to this point? I know like Breaking Bad did this a lot, but it's a bit of an eye roller, but it's fine. It works for me. It didn't take me out of it. So I take it didn't take you out of it either.
No, I thought it was fine.
Okay.
It fits Sonic. Sonic is kind of a, he is a practical joker, and especially this version of it, where this is a guy who's basically raised on pop culture.
Yes.
Watching movies through the Tom and Maddie's.
And this is the one reason why it kind of bothers me is that like 20 years from now, are people gonna still remember these pop culture things? Because it's like I was watching Freakazoid, right? I love Freakazoid, but there's so many like pop culture moments that I'm like, who's that again? What was that? like they have like this one scene where like everybody's tied up and they say, well, we're gonna show them the best of Marty Ingalls, and they all scream, no. I'm like, who's Marty Ingalls? I don't know who that is. Right? Like maybe Amazon won't exist in 20 years, right?
Well, it's that's the thing with comedy. Comedy is completely subjective. It is kind of written for the time. Not every, it's hard to write timeless comedy, and I wouldn't expect that level of, expertise from the guys writing the Sonic films. That's a level of writing that is, for the masters.
Right. I guess, I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm giving the Sonic movie too much credit, but for me, I do find like it's kind of like poetry. I know. I'm not going to say they rhyme. That's not what I'm saying, even though I love that line. It's kind of like poetry. a poem is, when you're like, especially when you're analyzing a poem, the funny thing here is I hated poetry in like high school because you're forced to do it. Like, what is the imagery? What are the symbols? Like, what does this have to do with the rest of the school? The author. Why did the author write the poem? And I'm like, dude, I don't care. Right? It wasn't until like later in life that I realized, I looked at it differently, like as a puzzle. So what I'm trying to say here is that you can often say like the humor, like the same way it is in Freakazoid, it's kind of similar to the humor at the time, that what made it funny, what made it part of like the aesthetic of what 2020s is. It's kind of important. So I can excuse humor that will obviously be dated in I don't know, 20 years, because this is a comedy. It's meant to be a comedy. It's not meant to be like I don't know, a tragedy or I don't know what else, a science fiction movie. like get this, like I was watching Total Recall last night, right? And it's like I
The
can't get
original or the remake?
the original. And I'm like, I'm looking at
Okay.
all this like technology, the way they're interacting with it is like, this is so cool. And it's like, if you showed like Generation Z or Alpha this movie, they'd be like, dude, why are they thinking that's cool? That's like something my grandpa used, Do you know what I mean? So I feel like in terms of comedy, it works a bit better in terms of things being aged. It was actually another example. Like if you watch Aliens, right? Like when Sigourney Weaver is like using the computer, you can always tell when the movie came out, what kind of computer they're using, or like the aesthetic. The only exception to this I can think of is like 2001: A Space Odyssey. Even though it does kind of blur the lines of like, does this still look modern? You know. But anyway, tangent done. Uh,
Okay.
Yeah, pretty much. The rest of the plot is, they get it, and they go back to Green Hill. Wade and company. I have to say one thing. It's really interesting watching Wade now. You're like, oh, I know this guy. I know who he is. He's the Knuckles Show guy, right? And mind you, I did not hate the Knuckles Show. I didn't hate it. I did enjoy some of Wade's jokes, and I thought the interaction between Knuckles and Wade was fun. Despite me not really being too keen on the ending, but we'll get there when we get there, when we talk about it. But yes, and like Crazy Carl and Wade, and they all try to like, chip in to defeat Robotnik at the end. I know you got the feels when watching the ending, but to me, it's just sort of like one of those moments where when Tom says like, Sonic is my friend, and it's one of those things where like when the Beast changes back into like human form, it's like, wait, that was all he needed to say for like him to come back? Like there's nothing else set up, right? I don't know. I mean, I get why he did it, why he gave him the extra power to like push himself to defeat Robotnik at that point, but to me, it was a little like this could have been set up a bit more. Actually, no. Speaking of setups, while we're on this topic, the one thing that kind of like took me, I don't know if it took me out of it, or I'm not sure if there was an in-universe explanation, but the scene where Tom finds Sonic in his garage that he thinks is a raccoon, right? He seems very gullible and very quick to take him in. Because obviously he has a lot to risk here. And I feel like they kind of brush it off that, like, if you, like, especially, like, if this was, like, E.T. or something, like, you remember how the way they act in E.T. when they find out there's an extraterrestrial, I mean, if this was real life, you'd be fucked, It's like, if you had an actual alien living at your house, like, I don't think they would transfer you to San Francisco after this. I don't think they'd just brush that off, especially if you're a fugitive, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, and he talks about that, and it's of like, hey, this is a really bad time. I can't do all this, yada yada. But at the same time, he does, and the government kind of very much kind of erases this whole event. That's why he gives them the Olive Garden gift card of the events that never happened that destroyed your kitchen.
Well, I guess you could to apologize for the movie. I guess you could argue that this was the government's way of saying, yeah, thanks for getting rid of that Robotnik guy for us. He was kind of a headache, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess
Here's
that's a nice
$50
way
gift
to
card.
I guess that's a nice way to tie a bow on it. So you can kind of cover up some holes because I forgot what is it. I remember reading a screenplay book once back when I was in college where it said it doesn't matter what screenplay you write or what story you write, there will always be holes. So my recommendation is do it like what Terminator 2 did. There's a big what is it? Time travel plot hole, and just expose that plot hole for what it is. Like I think it was like Sarah Connor that said it doesn't make any sense. How did Kyle Reese go back in time and then impregnate me to have him, right?
Well,
Not,
it
excuse
was
me,
one of
not
those.
him. Not Kyle Reese is one of his. I thought Kyle Reese was John Connor.
Okay.
Excuse me. Yeah. But anyway.
So basically, just to kind of rearrange the whole, it's a time loop. It's basically Kyle Reese, you know, because of the events, John Connor knows because his mom told him that eventually there's going to be a guy from the future, his biological father, who you're going to have to send back to kind of complete the time loop.
Yes.
And that, it's like, okay. And they did a little bit with that with like was it Dark Fate, the one with Christian Bale. He's
Yes.
got, these little he's monologuing himself, kind of just obviously he was raised by Sarah. It's like, hey, this is all this stuff's gonna happen. We're gonna get you all these, connections so you can be the hero that you were meant to be. But with that comes some interesting, scenarios where it's like, okay, we gotta, eventually you're gonna have to find Kyle Reese because if something happens to him, the whole, space time continuum, just goes wazoo up, because there will be no, John Connor.
Yeah, because they talk a little bit about how what is they kind of like expose the plot hole for what it is. So I mean
Yeah,
they tied a bow.
wibbly
When
wobbly,
I'm
timely,
Yes.
slimly.
I know I'm going on a digression here, but this is related. So I mean they did tie a bow on it that way. I do feel like they could have put in another scene where they had Tom talk about how he wanted to raise a family or he wanted a kid of his own or something. Because obviously they take him in as like their own son, pretty much. Or
Well,
like,
see, and that actually is kind of an interesting thing where that dynamic from friend to son really is more the second movie.
okay.
Because
Then
yeah,
I guess we'll
because
get into that when
not,
we get there.
we'll get into that, but this whole thing is that this is the friend that he's made, his friend's wife, who they kind of realize, they kind of take him in, they bring all this stuff up in the attic, and yeah, he's kind of, in those early ones, he's kind of their son without being their son. But definitely that's a thing that they really kind of, I think what was one of the lines Sonic has in 2 is just like, you're supposed to be my friend, not my dad. So, yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
I
I
think
guess true.
obviously by the third one, they've kind of embraced this whole family dynamic because it looks like they're on vacation camping in the beginning of the film for those guys.
Right. I mean, one thing I will say about upon watching this movie again was definitely that this really for me. Okay. I should probably preface it with saying I understand like one of the criticisms with like Sonic SatAM is the one of the reasons why people don't like it is because they say that this is more about Sally's world and more about it's more centered around her than it is Sonic. Whereas watching this movie makes me think, this is the SatAM for 2020. It's just mostly about Tom's world. But at the same time, I still feel for Sonic. I still enjoy what Sonic goes through. So for me, I'm going to ask you the questions. Is this the SatAM for 2020? What do you think?
Um, it kind of depends on how you define, SatAM. I mean, I think for this is going to be, for like I said earlier, what like Sonic X was for a generation, what Saturn was. This was kind of our entry point. This is our baseline for Sonic. Um, where you were kind of mentioning of it, oh, this is Sally's world as opposed to Sonic's world. Um, yes, I mean because it's Earth, it's modern day Earth. It's not Sonic's Earth per se. So I get where people are talking about that, but at the same time, I'm also like, I kind of see it, but I kind of don't.
Okay. I mean, I don't know. I mean, the way they put this plot together. All right, actually, let me explain a bit more. I do have some
Okay.
little bit more to say about this. Um, and this again, this is related, but to like take a step back from the Sonic movie and what it is and what it isn't. Um, how does this compare to like Sonic's best rival? How does this compare to the Mario movie?
That's really interesting because I feel like they're similar, but they're very different.
Okay.
Um, they are kind of, upstart heroes, kind of finding your path films. Because again, Mario's he's not the veteran, hero that we know him as. He's kind of a bit of a loser in the beginning of the film, but he finds his heroism, much like Sonic. But because it was an animated film, and very much they wanted to write a love letter to the Super Mario Brothers world, whether it be Brooklyn, the Mushroom Kingdom, Bowser, and they kind of made it this really big. The world itself was a character in the story, almost more important than the actual characters. Again, the characters in that movie are written really flat. I mean, I was having a conversation with Chevelle the other day. We were talking about it, and we both love Princess Peach in that film, but the writers basically kind of wrote her as what was once the strong female character is just all their character is. It's now the girl boss. You know, you can be a girl boss, but that's not a whole personality.
Oh
But we
yeah,
also talked
sure.
about, yeah, we also talked about how kids were loving it. So who are we to complain? It's not always written for us as the major demographic.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I mean, I guess the Mario movie itself, in general. I mean, my biggest concern about the Mario movie was it has weird pacing issues. It uses like pop music at inappropriate moments. I felt, and I
Yeah,
guess
it,
this,
it had more needle drops than the Sonic film did, and a lot of people were complaining about that.
and
The
the
needle drops
greatest.
in the Sonic.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the Sonic movies didn't like feel like have like it had forced needle drops or like because I mean I don't know. I go on famously saying whenever I meet somebody to talk about the Mario movie, it just wows me that Miyamoto himself didn't even refer to the Mario movie as a movie. He refers to it as the video asset, you know, which clearly shows you how much of concern he has for like what makes a movie. Whereas I'd argue like the Sonic movie does a better job in terms of like um, making it more like a movie, right? Because one criticism I've heard of the Mario movie that's really makes me laugh is I've heard some people say that the Mario movie was like an advertisement that you had to pay for, you know, right? Because obviously, I mean, because you could think about the Sonic games or the Sonic comics or any of these Sonic properties, and that's essentially what they all are. They're just trying to get you to buy the product. They're these quote unquote cash grabs. Whereas, this Sonic movie, I enjoyed it for it being like a movie that, I've seen in the movie theater before, that fits and looks and feels like a movie, right? Opposed to like an advertisement or, I don't know, um, characters running around on the screen, not doing anything or just being characters, right? Not having really much of a plot. Or watching somebody play a video game, that sort of thing, right? Um, But this kind of leads me to this question of this next thing I want to talk about to compare these two movies. So, Malzilla,
Okay.
tell me, what is the Mario movie about? What is it about?
It's about a plumber trying to be a hero, be someone, he's kind of trying to rise above his station. It's like, he quit his job, he and his brother, they made their own company. Their former boss says they're idiots, their parents say they're idiots. It's kind of trying to make something of yourself in the world.
Do you feel like it
And,
was Oh, go on.
whereas like Sonic is like similar, but it's kind of Sonic sees the world that he wants to be a part of, and he's trying to find a way to become a part of that.
So, not talking about Sonic just yet. About Mario. Do you think that he earns that at the end? Do you think that he's fully became a hero?
Um, I mean, I guess kinda. I mean,
See,
at the
that's the
most
thing.
superficial,
I
like
said that too. Kinda.
at the superficial level, yes, he and Luigi. Luigi really, I would say, if anyone in, Luigi has the big hero moment because like Bowser's going on a rampage, and Bowser's, Jack Black, another '90s comic legend. Uh, what I give for a Jack Black and Jim Carrey, Eggman and Bowser, movie? That'd be hilarious. Um, Bowser's going on a rampage in Brooklyn, and he's beating Donkey Kong, he's beating the Toads, he's beating Princess. Like he wants to wreck Mario, and Mario's scared. But Mario kind of goes out to confront him. He kind of confronts his fears, but he kind of also knows that he's gonna die. But it's Luigi who kind of has the big hero moment where he jumps in with the sewer grate to block the fire, and then they get the superstar and go da 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 da, and just rider kick Bowser into the next millennium, and then eventually they shrink him and throw him in a bottle.
Right.
So
Oh,
he kind of he gets it. Is it completely earned? No, but it's kind of much like Sonic, where like this is his first big step.
right. Well, let me ask you this then. I mean, in terms of like, uh, why did Mario want to become a hero?
He just wanted to be someone, everyone
Okay.
was kind of
So
looking
that was
down
just he
on him.
wanted to be somebody because he's tired of
Yeah,
just being a nobody. Okay. All right.
pretty
That's
much.
fair. Yeah, because
Whereas like Sonic was, he was an outsider. No one really knew it existed except for Crazy Carl. It's like, I know you're real. It's like, no, I'm not.
right,
Kind of
right.
just that's all the social interaction he has, and I think that's really interesting if you look at the movie and Sonic's growth is like, especially in that first like 20-30 minutes, he is, I know a lot of people complain, oh, he's not the confident Sonic that we know. Like, no, this Sonic has issues. He's got emotional trauma, not quite to the level of Shadow that we're gonna see in a couple of weeks, but he's he's had some difficulties. He's kind of raised himself on pop culture, and he probably spends too much time on it. But yeah, it's kind of at the end of the movie, in front of the whole Green Hills, who kind of steps up to help him. Says, "I'm not leaving. You are." And then everyone kind of treats him as a member of the community. Like, not to jump ahead too far, but like in the beginning of Sonic 2, when he's running back from being Blue Justice in Seattle, he runs by Wade in the speed trap, and Wade says, "Hey, Sonic." So Sonic has found a community. He's found his spot. He's found where he belongs. So yeah, I'm getting really deep on this, aren't I?
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna go a bit deeper, but
Oh,
I have to
dig a little
kind of
deeper.
no. I got to wrap this up real quick.
Oh,
Pause. 3, 2, 1. I got somewhere to go actually, because busy
okay.
life, right? There is
Me
more I
too.
want to get into this, but I think we could probably end this here.
Yeah,
So
well, I said let's just do a wrap up, and then we'll say next time we'll talk about Sonic 2.
Yeah, because I wanted to talk about more about what the Sonic movie's about and this eternal conflict and how it relates to Sonic X, but maybe we'll get to that another time because that's another
Yeah, save
conversation.
that for after we watch Sonic X.
Okay, I can do that.
Okay.
All right then. Yeah. So why don't you just wrap it up here? So
Okay.
in 3, 2, 1.
Well, folks, coasters, again, thank you for hanging out with us as we ramble on about a movie from 4 years ago. Um, but again,
We didn't
we enjoyed.
ramble. We eloquently talked about the Sonic film, and
That's
drank our
fair.
martinis. I hope you chimed glasses with us, after we
Oh, of
had
course.
this great, philosophical conversation about our favorite blue hedgehog.
Yeah, and don't worry, we'll be talking a little bit more next time, where we dive into Sonic 2 and as Tails and Knuckles and the Master Emerald become more involved. And how does that work? Does the more Sonic stuff work in this world, or does it? Find out next time. Again, this is the Sonic Coast Coast to Coast podcast. I'm Malzilla. With me, as always, is Radrey. Please join our Discord. Follow us on social media, Twitter, Blue Sky, Tumblr, and we'll see you next time.
And all I gotta say is, Keanu, you're a national treasure.
He really is. He really. They called their shot. They called their shot in 2020.
Yes, Keanu! You are a national treasure.